Thank you so much for speaking to me. This is a superb uh, show. Well, not show, but it's a podcast. I like to feel it as a show because it's just so much personality that's bubbling through.
I call it a
Um,
show. It's fine with me.
what I really love about this is you ask questions that I never even thought of and never even thought about in terms of, who you are as a person, your personality is the kitchen. So can you talk about when that idea first sparked and of all the places in the house, the kitchen? Why?
Well, the kitchen is where we become ourselves. There's a lot more that cooks in the kitchen besides the food. It's where we become who we are. Um, when I talked to Conan O'Brien, he said if he is clay, the kitchen is the kiln where he was formed. And I love that because I think it's true for many of us. I used to host a show called All Things Considered on National Public Radio. And Dana, you understand this that when you talk to someone, if you're in studio, you have to get them to talk a little bit. It's called a mic check to make sure the levels match. And people often ask really simple questions. And it's usually at NPR, the standard question was, what did you have for breakfast? And when you ask someone that question, the answer was always too short. They would say coffee or toast or oatmeal or nothing. Rarely would you hear someone say, oh, girl, I had bacon and eggs with French toast. And, people just, I guess they don't have time to do that during the week. So the answers were really short. And I have such a low voice that they often had to listen to people talk for a while so they could match. So I came up with a series of questions that got people to talk a little bit longer. What was your first summer job? What did y'all do for fun on a Saturday night? Tell me about your mama's kitchen. Did you use paper or plastic when you go to the grocery store? And the tell me about your mama's kitchen question just opened people up. They would go down memory lane. They would start talking about things that were very personal. And so, in the back of my head, for a while, I've been thinking that that would be a great podcast because it's a starting point and then it goes in so many different directions, depending on whether someone lived in the city or the country, depending on whether they had a happy childhood or not, depending on whether were their family lived in America forever or came to America and was trying to figure this place out. And so that simple question asked at the beginning of every episode is like a starting point for a journey that I don't understand until we get in the car, until we get in the studio, until we get on that ride and figure out where we're going. But the theory of the case holds true that we become who we are often because of what we sopped up in the kitchen and not just food.
Was the goal? We have different episodes with different experiences. Was the goal to capture as much diversity in terms of the background and the history of the kitchen, as opposed to how that kitchen created the person they are today?
Sort of both. I mean, everything I do in my life as a storyteller and a story collector
Mm.
is built around the idea of making sure that lots of different people see and hear themselves in the content that I create, while at the same time making sure that I introduce people to new worlds and new visions and new realms and new ways of being in the world. So I was really trying to do both things. It's a show about food. And yes, we're trying to introduce a diversity of culinary experiences. So, we've got Andy Garcia talking about his pollo fricassee and Uza Aduba talking about her Nigerian red rice or red stew, excuse me, and Michelle Obama talking about her mama's red rice. We just run the gamut. We have a show coming up where George Takai talks about um, Japanese food and the food that he loved as a youth. And I road test all the recipes, so I can't wait to get into that one too.
Mm.
But it was also an opportunity to look at American households and see different ways that people lived and different ways that they communicated and different ways that they dealt with all the things that life throws at us, whether you were in a small town or a big city, whether you were in a suburban household. And so we just present lots of different voices and lots of different experiences in a way that doesn't feel like it's finger wagging. It doesn't feel, and now we're going to have a conversation about diversity. It's just sort of baked in because you're peeking inside someone's window and not necessarily eavesdropping. You're invited to do that.
Right. What I found to be most interesting was even though I can't relate to everyone, there were pockets of little informations. And then it started to trigger my own memory. It was like, oh no, I don't have what kitchen? We wasn't in the kitchen. Then Michelle Obama, the hot comb. Yes, I remember. So I was really interested with how these stories kind of impact you and how you reflect upon your childhood experiences in the kitchen.
Every time I talk to someone, every single time there's an aha moment for me, where either I find something new, like we never did that, or that's a new way of thinking about things, or there's something that strikes me deep down because it resonates because I remember that. So whether it's Michael Pollan talking about having that little fryolator, that thing that looked like a little teeny version of a French fry grease pan that you see at McDonald's,
Yes.
with frying. His mom was making chicken a la Kiev. We were just making fried fish. Or whereas you say Michelle Obama talks about getting her hair done. I mean, a triggering memory for many of us, right? Fighting with your
Yes.
mom on Saturday night, going through 2 bottles of No More Tangles, and how everybody else would get out of the kitchen. Oh, I don't need to be here for this. Like everybody who wasn't getting their hair done would go as far away from the kitchen as they could. And I loved that particular conversation with our former forever first lady because she's written 2 books. She's done how many interviews on stage supporting those books, how many interviews in her role as first lady, yet she's never really talked about
Mm,
that really private aspect of her life. She's never talked about watching her cousin during the early years of feminism come home with kind of emancipated ideas and agency about how she saw herself and her way forward and how that challenged some of the more traditional views in her family and the tensions around that. We'd never heard her talk about that. And so by
right.
entering this conversation in a slightly different way, you're able to have, I mean, over and over, if you listen to the podcast, Danny, you've probably heard people say, I never talked about this before, or I'd never thought
Mm.
about this. And as an interviewer, you know that you're in a special space then because you're talking to people who generally are very well known, but we're introducing a different aspect of their life to people who know and love them.
Was that goal or really to connect everyone with that kind of experience of no matter what your kitchen looked like, there was a kitchen.
And I mean, when I remember when I was writing up the proposal for this, I
Mhm.
know whether you were cooking in a tricked out kitchen with a hood and a big island and double dishwashers and a double refrigerator, or the kitchen, which for some people was a pot over some bricks and some wood. It's still a kitchen. The kitchen is not just a room, right? A kitchen is the place where you gather for sustenance, where you are nourished. And some of us get to do that in not in spaces that are fairly opulent, but all over the world, most people are not in spaces that are opulent. It's
Right.
just basically a pot and some fire. And not even a pot. That pot might be terracotta. That might be just food on a stick over the fire. But wherever that is, you are getting nourished. And I guarantee you, if that is happening, you're not just getting nourished through food. You're getting nourished through advice and admonishments, through all the things you see. This is where you figure out if a relationship is working in a family. This is where you have your loudest arguments and your loudest laughter too. This is where you play games. This is where you learn about justice and fidelity and grace and generosity. Those big life lessons that help form who we are and how we see the world so often happen at the kitchen table or either adjacent to the kitchen table in the dining room.
I'm fascinated by the selection process. You have everyone who's completely diverse and there's different experiences. How did you go about deciding who is great for the show?
We have a big long list. I mean, it's a really long list. God
Mhm.
willing, we'll have several seasons and we can just tick through everybody. But we wanted to hit lots of different notes. So we were looking for people who are good storytellers, who have an interesting story to tell, who would help us understand lots of different cuisines and different regions of the country. And it was a little bit of a gamble. The most recent episode that dropped last week on Audible, you can listen ad free on Audible, is with Jeff Tweedy, who's the front man for a band called Wilco. Based in Chicago, he grew up in a small town in Illinois that's down south by the St. Louis border. If you've never heard of Wilco, you will listen to that podcast and still relate to the story that he tells. Still relates to, if you never heard of this indie band, never heard of Wilco, never heard of his first band, Uncle Tupelo, you can still listen to that and relate to when he talks about how his dad did a lot of the cooking in the backyard on the barbecue. But cooking was kind of beside the point, because really for him, cooking was about being with his friends and drinking lots of beer on the barbecue and talking a lot of smack outside. And the pork steaks tended to get a little overdone, and you could relate to that. You could relate to him talking about his mom, who went to work later in life and was a kitchen designer and never got the recognition she deserved, was really good at what she did at work, but was paid less than everybody else. A lot of us remember our moms nursing um, quiet resentments,
Mm.
a little bit of quiet pain because the world sometimes looked past them, despite all that they had to offer and all the contributions that they make. So the curation that you hear in the series is intentional. That we want to really create lots of different experiences, and we hope that along the way people trust us. So Gayle King, Michelle Obama, you don't know Jeff Tweedy, but you're going to listen anyway, right?
Right.
And vice versa. Jeff Tweedy, Conan O'Brien, Matthew Broderick, but you're not familiar with D Nice because you aren't on Instagram and you weren't dancing to Club Quarantine in the middle of the pandemic. You may not know him, but you're going to listen to his episode and you're going to hear something in that episode that resonates with you also. And maybe you go and you follow D Nice and you figure out who he is and you see all the wisdom that he has to offer in the way that he lives his life.
Wonderful. Also, with that, there is some topic of food that is in there. And so I know it seems to take a back seat, but at the same time, that is kind of what grabs the audience right away. You think, oh, it's about food. And then you learn that it's so much more. I wanted to know, will there be any kind of companion piece in terms of here's the recipes for what was mentioned in the dish or even the conversation?
Absolutely, absolutely. Right now, you can find the recipes on my Instagram page. We are
Mhm.
building a website, which will be rolling out in just a matter of days. We're just kind of beta testing it right now to make sure that when it rolls out smoothly. So we will have all the recipes on site there, so you can find that. And we also want to create an interactive experience that is somewhat that has a level of engagement. So when you try Uzo Aduba's her mama's red Nigerian stew, we want to hear how it went. She gives
Mhm.
us the warning, these peppers are hot. So if you're going to, don't touch your eyes, wash your hands. You might even want to think about gloves, glasses, goggles, because she said on a scale, if you want to do it the right way, I asked her, is 1 to 10? She said, it's actually 1,000. That's how hot the peppers are. So we want to hear about your experience with that. If you make, when we talked to Glennon, Doyle, and Abby Wambach, Abby's mother has something called pasta for thousands, which I made, and it was a bell ringer. My family loved it. When you make that recipe, we want to know how it went for you. Did you make any modifications? In some cases, people came to us with a memory, but they didn't have the recipe because an experience of your mama or your grandmama didn't write down the recipe. And so, or that you didn't keep those little recipe cards, you didn't, understand what a treasure they were. So we've done a little bit of culinary anthropology for some of our guests. W. Kamau Bell um, loved fried pies. When he said the taste of home for him was his grandmama's fried pies, and he got wistful and misty when he was talking about it. Made up a new word there, wisty. Uh, but he said that he was sad because when she died, the recipe died along with her. So I went on social media and I said, let's help this brother find a taste of home. And people were so generous in serving up their recipes, in giving us pointers. Well, if she was from Kentucky, so she probably would use this kind of fruit instead of this kind of fruit. People in certain parts of the world, it turns out there's a whole etymology of fried pies that are called crab lanterns in some places because they look like a crab claw. They're called
Mhm.
tasties. They have different names for them, and people cook them different ways, sometimes in oil, sometimes in butter, often with lard. The crusts are different. It was a working class lunch staple because you could make it and you could take it with you in a lunchbox, and it kept the rest of your food warm. So we have learned so much about fried pies, but the most important thing is that we're able to help him find that taste of home. And so in cases where people remember something, but they don't have the recipe, we try to use the community that we're building. Because I think through a podcast like this, you really are building community to help people learn from each other and experiment with each other when they try these recipes. So we're really looking forward to rolling out the website so we can serve something up to people by way of recipe, but we can also hear from them and hear about their experiences and maybe a word or two about their mama's kitchens.
I love it because you're helping with people's memories. You're putting them back together. So I love that about that. What is really, I love the question of what's in your refrigerator because that's when you kind of learn about people's success and struggles all through the refrigerator, and both the nourishing and how other people nourish you as well. So with that said, did while working on the series, did it start to make you reflect on your own experiences and how it impacted you as the person that you are today?
Absolutely. I think about when you ask the refrigerator question, I I think of my son, my youngest son, Norris. Uh, he a- and I asked Michelle Obama that question because I remembered a day where she's a dear friend and we've known each other for years, and a day where he actually went in their house and opened up the refrigerator. And it was like, you can't do that, especially not here. But that was something that he used to do all the time. He would march in someone's house and he would go in their kitchen and open up the refrigerator and look inside. What you got? And it wasn't that he was planning to eat. I think he, as a young person, understood that you could learn something about someone by what was in their refrigerator. And so I think about, as I'm talking to other people, my own story, not just in the refrigerator, but in the cupboards. And over time, what those cupboards have looked like. And yes, there were times when I was younger where there was struggle. There were times when I would visit my people in Alabama when I was young and didn't understand how much struggle there was, but realizing that the cupboards did tell a story of having to make do, having to stretch stuff, having to feed a whole lot of people, especially at the end of the month when money may have been tight. It makes me think of the experience in our kitchen that I hope will resonate with other people, and I hope will be a message in this podcast, is the importance of coming together over meals. We're all busy. We all often have devices. You see pictures, the cover of the New Yorker this week has people together at Thanksgiving meal and everybody's looking at their phone instead of each other. But the importance of coming together and having a meal and putting the phones aside. And no matter how busy you are, having dinner together. And that's something that my kitchen would tell that story. I think if you talk to my children, adult children now, about their mama's kitchen, I think that's one of the stories that they would tell, is that my husband and I tried very hard, no matter how busy we were, no matter how much we traveled, to make sure that we had family meals and they were inviolate. And you had to come, couldn't eat in your room, couldn't eat in the other room in front of it. Well, we came together as a family. And I think that that has helped hold us together as a family. And we still do that now that they're gone. When we get together, it's usually over food, and it's big and it's loud, and all of them cook now. But I hope that there are a couple things that I hope the podcast does beyond just entertain people, is that I hope it makes them think of the importance of food in our lives, the hands that prepare it, the hands that pick it, the hands that process it, all along the food chain, that we are grateful to our mamas, but also all the people who are involved in the process of delivering food to our tables. And that we also think about people for whom the kitchen is not a space of bounty. And I'm ever, present, because we're talking about people and their kitchens and the good things that happen there. But I also remember, and I want our audience to remember, and I'm looking for stories that help us tell that story too, that where the kitchen was a place of drudgery. Mom didn't like to cook, but she had to feed people. Where the kitchen is a place of want because the cupboards were bare. Jose Andres tells us that he is the person he is, not just the groundbreaking, um, culinary maverick that he is, but also the person who feeds people around the world, who runs toward danger and disaster and feeds people because of the lessons he learned from his mother at the end of the month when the cupboards were bare. And she had to
Mm.
figure out how to put innovative meals together, and that helped him become the chef that he is today. So, I do want people to remember those two messages: coming together, the importance of that, but also remembering those for whom the kitchen is not a place of plenty.
Thank you so much for speaking to me, and thank you for giving me my memories back that I completely forgot of how food changed my life.
Can I
Thank
ask
you.
you a question? Can you just give us a
Yes.
sentence about your mama's kitchen?
Oh, um, love. It was terrible food, but well loved.
Oh, oh no.
She can't cook. I love her. She cannot cook, but she meant well.
Well, love is the most important ingredient. So as long as that was there, then you're good.
No seasoning, but in love.
I've loved talking to you, Dana. Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much.
My best to you. Happy holidays.
Thank you. You too.